Hey, boss, I didn't know walleye fish had fingers. You're going to hear more about that story here in a little bit. We want to close out 2021 with you in our inaugural season of Disaster Podcaster with episode number 25. So this is a good New Year's Eve edition, and we'll see you in just a minute. Hey, thanks for joining us again. Again, Disaster Podcaster. This is a podcast dedicated to restoration industry, disaster cleanup, and the professionals that do the work there. Welcome to episode number 25. This is going to be our final of season 1, and this will air on the recorded platforms in the next couple of days. But we are streaming live today in our Disaster Podcaster Facebook group. So if you watch this later on either YouTube, where we play the entire video portion, or if you're listening to this on the podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, any of the regular platforms that have your podcast, wherever you listen to them all. If you are listening to this and you want to watch the live, you can. But if you'd like to be joining the live stream so that you can ask questions in real time, just go to Facebook and Disaster Podcaster. You'll see the same image and logo over there and join in the fun. It's kind of cool. We also did an episode last week where we took live callers, and that was something that we might try to do more of next year. It was a good topic about billing your client. First thing I do, as we talk about 2021, I can't do that without thanking those of you that have supported us in this venture of starting this podcast and video podcast as well, and the vlog. Season 1, 25 episodes. Truth is, we probably made about 28. Just some of them didn't make the cut because we aren't professional podcast engineers. We did our best. We YouTube and Googled, and we hired a consultant or a coach a little bit to help us to make sure. We want to make sure it was good, but it didn't always turn out well. We had some audio and video, some issues like that. So we recorded more, but we felt like 25 were good. And they're all available on our website, Restoration Advisors. They're going to be in the Disaster Podcaster group, or again, look them up on your favorite channel. So, and on this journey, besides those of you that listened, and of course, I couldn't have done this without Toby Klim, that works for us at Restoration Advisors for helping the engineering program, producing, keep me in check, telling me what's funny and what's not funny. So I couldn't do this without thanking all of those. But also I want to make sure I thank our sponsor, Kevin Dooley with Kahi Incorporated, really stepped up and helped with a financial and contribution to help us put this together with some of the right gear, some of the right platforms to do so, and some of the other accessories and things like that. So thanks to Kevin for being a supporter and sponsor of not only this industry, but our podcast. Kahi, if you go to kahi.io, it is an incredibly powerful asset and fleet management tool. As a matter of fact, it's I just learned something new this week. So it can track your fans, dehumidifiers, anything of value. I know people that track their ladders. Ladders are not cheap, and if you have a lot of them and they disappear, it gets expensive. But so tracking your assets in your fleet, but also I just found out this week they have cameras for the cabs of your trucks, forward and rear facing, that have facial recognition, which will text you and alert you when your team might be distracted or maybe texting. And there's just some really cool things that I saw into that. One of my clients actually called and said, "Hey, Clark, I heard the podcast with Kevin, and I was looking at their website and they have the camera set up. I'm already paying that through another vendor, but I like the asset tracking of all my other fans, dehumidifiers, scrubbers. I like to have all of it in one system." I said, "I don't blame you." Plus, Kahi is integrating with a lot of the real powerful, important CRMs and project manager software. So really some good stuff there. So check out Kahi and get on their list or their appointment for a demonstration. But thanks to all of them. And I just wanted to tell everyone Merry Christmas. This is being recorded on December 31st, the New Year's Eve of 2021. So heading tomorrow into the day of New Year's and then right back at it next week. We're also closing out 2021 in our business, just like you are. You know, this is the weird week between Christmas and New Year's where, I don't know, business is slower, homeowners aren't making claims, adjusters aren't responding and talking to anyone, payments aren't coming in. I know a lot of clients were having some cash flow struggles this time of year. But you know what? The more that you're in this business, the more you start preparing for that. I would say first week of December, start looking at your receivables to start getting bigger and thicker. It's just how it goes. So get ready for that in August and start building up and slow down your spending and save your fuel. So, but we looked at this year, looked at what we did new, what was successful, what wasn't. This podcast was one of them. This podcast, I didn't think it was going to be, but it's been very successful. And I mean successful by brand awareness and giving us a platform to talk about more things and help people with some value and showing things like that. But also, we're doing blogging. We did some courses. We did a course on Xactimate about the Xactimate pricing. So check that out on our website. But again, season 1's over. Season 2 starts next year. We're just going to start asking ourselves the same questions we tell everybody. We're not going to repeat what we did. We're obviously going to keep doing what was successful in some degree, but how do we continue to evolve and be what like Toby considers the purple cow? If everybody on this street is going down to the light and taking a right, I want to make sure that we're not even on that street. I'm going to be on a different road. So we're going to continue to evolve. There are a lot of podcasts out there, a lot of good ones. I mean, there's some really good friends that have good podcasts, all delivering slightly different content, maybe even appealing to a slightly different audience. And there's space for all of us, but I want to make sure that we stay in our lane, deliver some value, entertainment, and hopefully create some new conversations and make some change in this industry, because that's what I'm all about. Let me pause here. We're doing live streaming. Any comments? Any questions so far, Toby?
Yeah, Robert Moray checked in and Mike Hogan.
Mike and Robert, both good guys. Good. Happy New Year's, guys. All right, so I want to segue into our topic today. I did a poll in our group, probably this one and probably another one that we own for Restoration Advisors, asking, we do a podcast, and what do you like to hear on your podcast? I know Toby likes to listen to murder mystery. I believe it is a murder mystery podcast. I've never listened to a podcast. I don't really. Maybe someone played me a clip of it. I've obviously caught some Joe Rogan clips on YouTube and stuff like that, but it's not usually where I consume. But I'm interested to know what causes people to say that's worth me spending it adds value to me. So and the questions were, is it interviewing other people, industry icons? Is it education? Is it business solutions problems? Obviously the answer was one of the, I left it open so that anybody could add their own. And one of them was, how about a combination of all three? So 20, 30 people voted, we'd like you to have business solutions wrapped with a story and maybe an interview. So leave it to us restorers is wanting everything. Well, so today what I wanted to do was do something I don't do a lot of because I just don't really want it to come across as braggadocious and about me and ego-driven. But I wanted to talk about a really big, complex project that I ran, because I know that those like me and other restoration nerds and geeks in the industry like to hear about details on big, complex projects. And again, I'm telling everyone these things not to say, hey, check out what I've done. It's just that if you're in this field and you're driving forward and you're building your business, it might come a day where this is going to be you. You're going to come across these jobs, and just having some perspective and having some reference to some of this stuff. And things happen in this industry every day that you guys and I don't even know. I mean, there is some. I've done some really large projects that have nothing to do with a fire or a flood or anything else. I mean, there's just some really. I've cleaned out humongous bodies of water with dead fish. Okay, we've just helped recover the dead fish. It was an ecological hazardous situation. We had to get the dead fish out of this water, and it was tens of thousands of fish. Dumpsters. It's not really what I thought I would ever do, but it was a need. It's what the customer needed, and we did it. So I want to segue into, as I was thinking about a really interesting, complex project that I could actually talk about. So some of the jobs that I've been on, I just can't divulge enough details to make it interesting. And that's sometimes because of, there have been obviously some that were classified governmental jobs or something like that, but some of them worked for companies that just don't, I don't have permission to put their information out there and what happened. Some of them just don't want to know that they've had this kind of occurrence at their company for the public to know, so it's like branding issues. So I'm really cautious on what I put out, but this one is on national news and it was well advertised. So I think what I'm going to talk about, what we did, isn't breaching any kind of privacy or disclosure issues. So let's get right into it. Toby, any questions? We're all good? All right. Let's go back and rewind the clocks for a minute to, I'm going to be looking at some notes here. So November of 2011, there is a city that's it's slightly northeast of Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's called Becker, Minnesota, probably 75 miles outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, which are the big hub of Minnesota. There is a power company that serves that entire region of the country. It's called Xcel. And Xcel, they provide power for Minnesota, probably all the neighboring states, South, North Dakota, maybe Montana, some others that are connected, Wisconsin. Nonetheless, big company, provide a lot. And a lot of it's coal, and there's actually some nuclear and things like that. Well, they had this one plant that had an explosion. So I was a project director for the company that we did this, large company that I worked for, and we had a relationship with an insurance broker. So claims this big customers that big, first off, they're self-insured to a pretty high dollar amount, but their insurance gets involved in case it exceeds that number. So it's not uncommon for a big Fortune 500 company to have an out-of-pocket expense of $20 million before insurance kicks in. It just keeps their premiums low. They self-fund their claims. So we had a broker that called us. He was a friend of our company. We had done a lot of work with him, and he just knew that we could handle a job of this complexity and mobilize. And we had an office and a branch out of Chicago, and that was our nearest office. So I got the call from my corporate office and said, hey, we've got a large issue here. We're going to mobilize you out to fly into Minneapolis and go up and take a look. So obviously, there's a couple of days. The way these work is it's not, you don't move the Army immediately on some things like this. This was, let's take a moment. This was pretty complex, a lot of moving parts. So I flew in to start taking a look at it, meeting the client, looking at the scope of what needed to go on. But we knew we were going to be drawing from our Chicago office. And it was really interesting. That Chicago office was pretty bare and depleted. As a matter of fact, when I first flew up, we did not have any response vehicles out of Chicago. So we were already looking for, I'm not sure where the next closest, it might have been Colorado, next closest office to start pulling resources from. But because of the time and how it worked out, some other people finished up a project. We had some assets and resources come in to, come back in. So I flew in, met with all the parties. Our health and safety officer met me up there. And unfortunately, he's not alive anymore. I found out this past year that that gentleman is no longer with us. And he was not an old guy. He was a younger guy. But sad to say, I just thought of that as I was telling the story. So I flew in and met with the plant. So it's the Xcel power plant, and this happened, they had multiple buildings, multiple different plants, but this one building called Sherco 3, don't know what Sherco was. It's Sherco 3 was the one, and these were these really big turbines. Okay. So they have these big turbines that create power through coal and burning, and just like turbines do. I think we have an image of that if we haven't already put it up there. This is it. After the fire, it's already being disassembled. Now, that was not in our scope. This was owned by GE. This was a very technical piece right here, the fire. But this plant had been shut down for a couple of months before. They shut down some of these big plants. If you were in the industrial space, they have shutdowns for cleanup, for tune-ups, for change of fluids, switch out, the engineers and things like that. So this has been shut down. Trying to fire it back up in November, and it exploded. And what happened was, besides the fire and the soot and the char, almost every joint and union and pipe in there rattled and expanded and shook from the concussion, and just an insane amount of hydraulic fluid, oil, and other coolant and other chemicals just coated the inside of this plant. So this plant was approximately 400,000 square feet. The building itself was, if I remember, we were right around 175 feet up. I mean, we're talking 5-6 stories tall, just a massive building. So right around the turbine, the damage was obviously, from the fire. So there wasn't really any material. There wasn't plastic. So when you think of fire, what burned and what's the fallout look like? So this was electrical. It wasn't, believe it or not, a terrible amount of soot and char. So there was going to be some cleanup of that. Again, 175 feet up. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the bigger cleanup was all the other surfaces that were now coated with slippery, oily, grimy fault fluids. And from a safety standpoint, that had to be cleaned up. So go up there, and I spend a couple of days walking it. The building was set up with, obviously there were 2 turbines, but only one of them exploded. The other one, they planned on trying to get started up. The one turbine that exploded was on the north side. And so right above it, you've got just an empty cavern building with straight up to the ceilings, like I said, 175 feet. You have cranes going across, bridge cranes that are mounted to the structure of the building. We ended up having to build scaffolding on top of these cranes up in the air to clean the structure above. Okay, so, and then the other parts of the building were all levels of mechanical and just electrical and just other components. But we had probably 5 floors of mezzanines and layers, and some of those were solid floors with concrete, and some were wire or metal mezzanine floor, which were oily. But we had concrete walls, we had ceilings, we had pipes and chases and control panels, and all kinds of things were just covered with this oil. So we looked around, and we developed a scope with some engineers, with our team, and with the plant safety officers, and discovered that dry ice blasting was going to be primarily the best and most economical and efficient system to use to clean this up. So I've cleaned with dry ice blasting a few times, but nothing near this scale. I'd like to go ahead and point out that as we're doing this, we're learning a little bit more about what's going on here. This turbine is shut down, and the expectation is they're supposed to be providing power for several 100,000 people in that area, all the way up to Duluth, Minnesota, over to Fargo, North Dakota. I mean, this was a serious impact. So what that meant was that Excel had to reallocate power from some of its other plants, and even in some cases, because it was more economical, they had to buy power from other sources, other power grids at retail. So we're looking at a lot of expense here, and obviously schedule and time was incredible. I mean, they had a lot of stuff. I mean, our crew meetings, our staff meetings, and client stakeholder meetings would sometimes have 20 to 30 different subs doing different things. We had a lot of management around schedules and whatnot. So some of the details on the cleaning this thing. So we go and we got, obviously, guys, you go in and you've got to put a ROM, a ROM on a job, or a rough order of magnitude. You got to start really coming up with the scope, how you're going to clean it, and how quick that's going to be, and how many people it's going to take to meet how long till they need it back open. You kind of back into it that way. And then what can you get to There's obviously other people working. Some things we don't have access to. We weren't touching the turbine itself. They were actually going to disassemble that, move it out, and then rebuild it off-site somewhere and bring it back. I actually think it went to Norfolk, Virginia, to get worked on a flatbed trailer. Funny enough, it had gotten so hot in the explosion, it melded all the metal pieces together, so it became one hunk of metal. So we worked into this, and we started putting together numbers for our efforts, and that's equipment, that's the personnel, the labor, the staffing, the equipment that we're going to need to access some of these areas, per diem, trips back and forth, just consumables, office trailer, all this kind of stuff. So you're just really going through, what am I going to need on this job? What's it going to cost? What are our published rates? So I worked on that offsite. Once we got an agreed upon scope, I just went and sat and started working on what's this going to cost? What's what we used to consider not to exceed, but it's the ROM or it's the reserve. And I kept coming up with a really big number. I'd done some big jobs before, but by the way, this was going to be a union job or partially union. We had to use union people. So that obviously really, really exaggerates the number. And that's something I haven't done a lot of, but not a lot at that point. But we're going to be using union, and that adds a multiplier on top of the labor burden. But I went back and I kept working on the number, and I was coming up with around between $4.5 to $5 million. And I was like, this is a lot of money. And, there's a little part of you that says, what it's going to cost, blah, blah, blah. But she's like, I don't want to lose this thing because I don't want them to call in somebody else. So we go to sit with our binder and the presentation to pitch it to the engineers because this guy was like a PhD engineer of this place, a mechanical engineer, and he was in charge. And we sat with the carrier who pretty much said, and you'll hear it in a second, but we sat down and we said, okay, it's going to be, here's what it is. Boom, drop the number down. They look at it and said, okay, let's go. And I'm like, oh, man, I left some money on the table. And then later I asked the broker who I had a good relationship with, I said, that was kind of quick. He goes, dude, what you don't realize, this claim between damages and business interruption, which includes them buying power retail, the gap between what they can sell it for and what they're making, this is a $400-500 million claim. Yours is kind of a little piece of it. And I'm like, wow, thanks for making me feel great. But we were just a small part of it. Important, but I felt like it was a good number, and it ended up being. We did good with margins. But so we were going to dry ice blast this thing. I want to watch the time here. Dry ice blasting was going to be probably 70% of this. I've got some numbers here. 70% of the building was going to be touched with dry ice. Some just couldn't be. We had panels, electrical panels, different kinds of surfaces that could not be blasted with dry ice, but the concrete, the mezzanine, the pipes, and stuff like that could. Interestingly enough, if you've never worked with dry ice blasting, it depletes the oxygen at a really rapid pace. So there's actually a safety concern when you're in a confined space or a really tight space. When I say confined, there is a technical term of confined space, and then there are areas that are just confined. So nothing I needed a permit for, but we were wearing PAPRs because we needed to make sure we replenished. We had sensors on the O2 level in the area, so we actually wore PAPRs, which are the supplied air mask, not only for protection, but for also making sure that we kept enough. And it was really, really cold, so your oxygen, it takes more oxygen, when it's colder outside. So we had these levels. We had between purchase and lease, we had to get some of these large-scale dry ice blasting units, and they require big compressors and generators. We leased a few and we bought a few. Just said, this is something we'll use more and more often. And this job was big enough; it was probably going to take us a couple of months. Some of them were big units that had 2-gun outlets on it. Some of them had 4 and 6 gun. They were some big units, so that we could split people up and put people on different levels. And just, again, we weren't working around the clock because of the burn on the union labor after hours and double time was incredibly expensive. And it didn't need to happen as long as we were productive. But we had between 75 at some points and about 140 people working for about 2 months up there. But what's really interesting is, obviously we did some tests on different surfaces where, before you do that, before you you test, and experiences some of it, and some of it you're just guessing. But some surfaces were going to take more blasting and some less, depending on what their makeup was. But dry ice blasting, you obviously have to buy the media, what they call the media, which are the dry ice pellets. Well, if I remind you, we were in November in Minnesota, so we were able to purchase the media, have it delivered, and store it outside because it was in the single digits for the whole time we were there, just about. So storing it wasn't a problem, and we were able to buy it in bulk in a big truck, in a flatbed trailer actually, and left it out there. We had a forklift on site. So let me give you some numbers here. You order these big, large totes of dry ice pellets, and the good thing about dry ice, by the way, is once you use it and spray and it's exhausted, it dissipates and breaks up. There's almost no cleanup. But what you do have left to clean up with the HEPA-Vac is the material that you blasted off, the leftover, the media that's a source material that you've cleaned off of. That doesn't just go away. So that's the cleanup, but not the media and that. So it really kind of made it a lot better. But the totes they would hold about 1,500 pounds, half a ton of media. So you'd fill these up. They couldn't be completely full, but they'd be full. At the time, and I don't have the invoices and everything in front of me, I'm just kind of remembering back to it, is about $250, $260 per pound to buy the media. Okay. We ended up, so that's about, I have some notes here, $3,750, $3,750 per tote. We ended up using around 110 totes of media. That vendor loved us. Doing the math, that's about $415,000 just in media. You had delivery cost. We obviously had overspray. You lose some stuff like that. We had the equipment, but that's just for the product. So, this job ended up, we went through, and our number ended up being really, really, really close to what we said it was going to be. I think we had a change order of 2. We had a delay for something. And, when you have a delay and you have, I mentioned we had about 75 to 150 people. So part of that is your labor that's local or maybe came in. And then part of that's your own company and corporate staff or your supervision and whatnot. So when you have a 3 or 4 day shutdown, they still have to be paid. They're still there away from home. It's not always economical to send everybody home and bring them back when they're from all over parts of the country. They're not all from Chicago, by the way. So there was a little bit of downtimes, and it caused some slight increases. Nothing that was major, but we made sure we documented that, and that's something I teach everybody. Keep an eye on your burn rates and your increases so that you can document that. But it was a fun project. It was challenging. What I loved was watching some of the staff and some of the junior leaders that we had. We had some assistant project managers and supervisors at that point. It's in 2011 with that company, supervisors who the director of ops told me, he said, you've got some, I was the project director, and he said, I really want to use this job as an opportunity to test out who's made up what and build some people up. And I want them helping with as much of the management as possible and seeing, testing everybody and seeing, evaluate. So we had some supervisors that eventually became assistant project managers and then project managers that became probably now, I think as a matter of fact, some of them are now directors of operations, and one's a VP of something or another. So not even in production anymore. He's in sales. So it's really cool to watch people grow in those situations. That's why I talk about that doing so much. But I wasn't there all the time. It was about 3 months. So this started, by the time we got started and got approval, money up front, by the way, I always tell everybody, ask for a big chunk of money to get mobilization. We did. By the time we got started, it was early December, and this thing ran into, in some level or not, into February or March of the next year before our part was done so we could get out of their way. But I was there a lot of the time, or especially the first few weeks, and then I would fly out and go look at other jobs and come back. And I was there one time, and again, my favorite thing about these jobs is always the stories. I would fly in, and I was always like, boss man's coming in, he's going to take us all to eat. So I'd had the company credit card. And Becker, Minnesota is not a big town. They don't have an NFL team. I just wanted to put that out there. But I've got some friends that live in Minnesota. I don't want to upset anybody, but what they have a lot of in the winter are snowmobiles and bars. You always find a way to get your vehicle or your snowmobile to a bar. So we would eat at this bar and grill. And they had bar food, and we were there. And one of our superintendents, big old boy, God, he was between 6'2" and 6'6", depending on how drunk I was, and he was a big old boy, and had the heart of gold. I think some of the crew called him Cowboy, but not the sharpest knife, just simple. And we're at this restaurant, and I think they'd been going there a while, but maybe he's kind of the guy that saved his per diem. He made about $40 a day in per diem, and he would like to see how much of that he could keep and send back home and hoard that money. And he was Mr. Peanut Butter and Jelly. And if you said, hey, we're going out to eat, he'll say, you paying? If you said no, he said, I'm good, I'm staying here. His room always had a whole lot of cereal and Cheerios. But we'd go to sit and eat. And I'm not saying his name because I don't want it to make, we're not making fun of him, but we're sitting there, and I look across the table, and I see him kind of perplexed looking at the menu. And again, he wasn't dumb. He just was simple. And he's looking at the menu, and I said, what is it? He looked up, and he said, I didn't know walleye fish had fingers. And we all cracked up laughing. So walleye is the big popular fish up there. I mean, I guess they ice fish and get it everywhere, and it's delicious. But we had eaten walleye all different ways, fried, broiled, blackened, but they had walleye fingers, which were just basically fish strips and fried. But he had not been eating it there. He did not know that walleye had fingers. So we, for years, we talked about how those walleye fingers, and he's like shake his head. So it was always fun. It was really cool. Talking real quick about union labor, there's a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions that people will say about union labor, and some of them are true and some of them are not, just like anything else. But this is different. I guess I would say Midwest, your union, these were some hard-working men and women, and they knew that building. And let me tell you, when this company had safety protocols, it was incredible how much safety there was and how much you had to know. And all these, every break was at the end of every break that you took, you had to have a safety meeting. But this teams that we used, and it was a mix of some of them, some of ours, became good friends. These were hardworking men and women, and it was really a good experience working with these great folks, and we learned a lot from them. And I think that's another thing that I love about this industry is you not only the one teaching, but you're learning as you go. So a couple of years, a couple of months we spent in Becker, Minnesota. I'd go up there and have a little bit of downtime, and I got to know some people, and I didn't go ice fishing. So one day, Andy Michaels or Dean, you can teach me how to ice fish up there. But I drove up to Duluth, Minnesota, and checked it out. But really good people. Just you never know where that next call is going to be. We did not know anything about this plant. We just knew it was a big plant that had a fire. Your mind is racing. It could be anything. Your imagination is going crazy. But you just get there and you process it and you break it down into different components, and it all comes to you, and it's really simple. And I love that about this business. So I love teaching people how to run complex and large losses because they're not always that much different than what you do when you have some systems around that. So at this point, are there any questions? I don't know what else to tell you about the job, but if you've got some questions about running this thing, feel free to chime in. Do we have some viewers right now, Toby?
Yeah, we got a couple viewers still. I was just going to mention that you should unpack the safety component of working at a nuclear facility a little bit. The restoration industry, they love all the technical aspects of it, and I know nuclear is. I have friends in the nuclear world, and the protocols are just incredible. Standard operating procedures are something that they live by, but they've got to be super detailed. So it might be interesting to some folks to unpack that a little.
I will. So again, this one was not nuclear. This was coal burning. I've worked in nuclear, and nuclear is another level for sure. But this one had the complexities were, believe it or not, cold. People had to go out, and there were some points where it was -10, -20. So we had some people that were out. I mean, this is a lot of people working, going out and loading the hoppers for the dry ice blasting, going out and getting lifts. I mean, there's some safety precautions around that. You had a lot of other parties working, other people working with big equipment. Obviously you had hard hats at all times. I mean, I can't tell you how hard. And now working with union labor, they sleep with their hard hats on, so that wasn't a problem. But, man, our own staff, get them to remind them, say, hey, where's your hard hat? That was every day. We had two-way radios for communications. Learning what some of the red alerts and some of the signaling was in the plant. They had some area-wide signaling for whenever there needed to be a safety briefing. There was different sounds and different bells and things like that you had to learn. And, again, in some of these cases, Toby, we were at a disadvantage. We were visitors on this thing, but we learned it pretty quickly. I'd say a week or two. The project manager that I assigned to that job, he melted into that, and he became close with all the other subs, and it really made it easy to work around. But every safety meetings all the time. I teach safety in some of our large loss mastery classes, and what I'll tell you is you've got to do your initial risk assessment. But more importantly, you've got to look for the changes because your environment's always changing. You're on different surfaces now. You're working with different teams. Your voltage on this floor is much different. The temperatures here have changed. The capabilities of people working around has changed. So just creating good documentation around how we did that. OSHA, by the way, they were on site all the time. I don't have to tell you that. I mean, they had their own office trailer there. And, again, they're there most of the time. Your safety enforcement officers, whether they're hired or if they're OSHA, want to be in compliance mode, not enforcement mode. So they like to help people stay safe and stay alive. They're not there just to write tickets. That's usually only after adherence to their recommendations haven't been listened to, and this is repeat offenders and things like that. We had one injury. Someone slipped and fell and went down like half a flight of stairs and hurt themselves to a point where they couldn't work for 2 or 3 days. And I think we reassigned them, superintendent, or reassigned him to something else. And he ended up helping watch some of our supplies and manage that. But it was just a slippery situation, and we just always had to, you couldn't be carrying a lot of things in your arms while you're walking around. We had a lot of guidelines, and just compliance with those became babysitting and herding cats, because this is just not something you face all the time. But that power plant had a lot to lose if they had subcontractors, which we were, that would breach safety protocols. But nuclear is a whole other story. But this was a pretty intensive safety, and it's probably what's caused me to be so diligent about these things, and document binders full of that, measuring temperatures and assessments with people every day to make sure everybody's good and healthy, and recording when people miss work and making sure you know why and stuff like that. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. Cool. Any more questions or comments? Anybody in the field out there, anybody in the audience have anything to ask, feel free to go and do it. These jobs don't come up all the time, but they do come up, and it's never when you expect them to. Do you have something to say? Nope. All right. Well, we're about 40 minutes into it. That's usually where we keep most of our podcasts. So listen, this was kind of one-sided. I love the feedback. So here in the next couple seconds, if anybody has anything, throw it in. But I'd like to tell you thanks for tuning in. I want you to have a really, really great New Year's. If you are listening to this, I want to remind you there were some visual cues on screen. If you don't know what those were, you need to go to YouTube and look at Disaster Podcaster, look at Restoration Advisors, and you'll see episode 25. But I guess we'll start to wrap it up and wish everybody. Hold on, we got.
Mike said a job like this teaches that we should be more aware of risk management, documentation, etc. And then Robert asked, how many PMs did you have? How many PM did you have taking documentation? How many PMs did you have making documentation? Maybe. Is that what you meant, Robert?
So I had one primary PM on the job, and then he had one or two assistant PMs, but we had strong superintendents. So everybody was responsible for documentation of what they did that day, how many square feet, what floor they worked on, how many people they managed, what safety topics they covered throughout the day, what new risk awareness came up. There was a lot of documentation that was required. And so, that's what our job is as a company. Is it's not something that we do on smaller water damage or small fires, but this job required another level. So I had one PM doing this, but we had a safety officer assigned full time, and our safety officer, it actually ended up being a she, because she was a safety compliance officer. Our corporate safety officer that I mentioned passed away. Couldn't stay on his job the whole time. He had to float around the country and look at other jobs, but he placed a compliance officer there, and Rhonda, super documentation freak. So she made sure everybody had it, helped them, would sit, but she would not sit with you 3 times and show you the same thing. She just would tell the PM, that person's got to go. And the safety officer's weight is pretty heavy in those places, because that's not something you can't just brush it under a rug and forget about it. So documentation on that, but the PM would accumulate, it's always like, Robert, it's like a funnel. It's like an org chart. The PM would not deal with all 175 people. He dealt with 2 or 3, and those 2 or 3 would deal with 5 or 6, and then 5 or 6. So it's tiers. No one manages that much, but documentation on what you did that day. Again, what the temperatures were. It's a short day. It's a long day. Who didn't show up? Copious notes, so that anyone that wasn't there now or back then, either one, can open that up, take a look at it, and read the story.
Mike said thank you, but he's also wanted to know if we're doing anything in New York this year.
Yeah, we're going to come bite the Big Apple. I think you're talking about gathering. I would say let's reach out to Bob and see what. I know Bob was ill recently, Mike. So Bob Timmel is what Mike's talking about is our association. For anybody listening, we have an association. As a matter of fact, the Alliance of Independent Restorers is a coalition and a collective of restoration contractors. We're trying to unite our industry to do more things like this, but locally and regionally and nationally. Get our voices together, work on industry standards, help fight some of the pressures that we have, and change the perception of what the value of our industry is. We are not just rug suckers. We are literally a niche market contractor. So, Mike, I don't have anything yet right up, but I'd say let's reach out to Bob. And he told me he was ill. Actually, he and his whole company were. He shut down for a week or 2. But I'm ready. I'm ready to do it sooner than later.
That's it.
Okay. Yep. On the screen, airrestore.org. Join. We have chapters all over the country. We have people in Minnesota, but not Becker. Listen, at the closeout, I've got to pay the rent. I've got to go ahead and tell you that we've been working on some really great courses, really some great things. We've got an e-course that we've got that's going to be launched next month. Some people have already jumped on it. If you want to, go check it out. Get rid of that money before taxes, before the end of the year. But it's going to be 45 days to build a strong restoration company. What does that mean? It means if you're just starting, or if you're just about to open a restoration company, you want to in the future, or you've been open 1 or 2 years, or maybe you've been open 10 plus and you just say, you know what, I want a refresher. We have gone from the very beginning of planning a business and what it means and why you've opened it to all the things. What my ideal is to create a course that people, like I said, just starting or been in this for years, we've all learned something. Let's quit repeating that over and over, and let's get rid of a lot of the things that cost money, that cost time, that cause you headaches, and takes us there's things that we know that we just learned as we went. It's our duty to teach future generations of that. And so that's what this course is. And it's a 45 days delivered daily, one lesson. They're not real long. It's a video lesson of me. We've been working on that really hard, still finishing it and producing it, finalizing it. But and then it's going to be delivered to you once a day for 45 days. It's all the way through marketing, through safety, through documentation, estimating, staff, everything. And then it gets into, you'll have it into a library forever. It's an e-course that you can go back to and you and your team can watch it. And then we have a community built around it. You can go into a community like these pages here, but it's not on Facebook, and talk to other people that are taking it at the same time, or already have, or they may already be ahead. So we've got a new community that we're building. You're going to hear more about that. That's another big product. It's called Restoration Nation. We are moving away from Facebook. Facebook is not a great place for a lot of reasons. But number one, it's no longer a great place to have groups because you've got so much distraction and algorithms and you don't see all the posts. We've got some dedicated a group that we've built. It's going to look and feel and taste and smell a lot like Facebook. It doesn't quite have all the bells and whistles, and it just doesn't need all that, right? So Restoration Nation, it's going to be a community around people who are working on some of our products or courses, or you just want to join it. One other thing, I know Toby's getting ready to pull the curtain on this thing, but we've built a series of restoration workshops. I think right now we have 4. I think I have 2 or 3 more that we want to build out around certain particular education points, whether that be onboarding clients, network and marketing, building SOPs for your business, using something. I think something else is using it besides Xactimate. Is that part of it? Yeah. Building your own price list without using Xactimate for your mitigation project. So these are workshops that will have about 20 to 22 people in them. It's a 5-week course spread out every 2 weeks. It's kind of like a mastermind. One of us will be facilitating and teaching these, and then there'll be space in there for Q&A and additions, and then daily homework and stuff like that. So it's really going to be cool. Priced really affordably. Trying to get those filled up. They're going to start next month. What you got, Toby?
Mike asked if we're doing anything commercial. I asked for clarification. I don't know if he's still watching or not. I'm thinking he's meaning courses focused on commercial work.
Mike, let's talk offline about that. Let's see what you're asking and what your mindset is. I would love to create a course on commercial and complex loss. I don't like to use the term large loss because not all commercial projects are large, and not all large losses have to be complex. So it's really just, I don't want to say large loss, but getting commercial work all the way from how do we attract, getting more of it, how do we manage it, how do we turn that customer into a referral partner and get more projects like it. So that's something I want to do big in next year. And that's kind of my wheelhouse. Obviously, you just heard this story. I could do that stuff. So it's estimating it, contracting it, getting it signed up. So if that's what you're talking about, the answer is yes. Let's put that together. I would love, the hard part is promoting it. I can build it, but I'm just not the best at marketing. I just got to get that out there and get more people, and that just takes a lot of energy. But no excuses. It's a really good course, and I'd love to do that. So I think that's all of our products. Next year, I will have some more traveling going on for traveling classes. Now I think COVID is lifting up a little bit. I've got some stuff planned with the Australia friends. We're going to be over in Australia, and they're going to be here. We're going to do some co-branding, some traveling with them. So it's really cool. So a lot of things in the works. We're not sleeping, but other than that, I think that's going to do it. We're going to Happy New Year. Everybody be safe and enjoy and watch the ball drop tonight and kiss your loved ones. Thanks a lot. Still here? What are you doing here, man? Get out of here. Happy New Year.